I have a couple of very attractive women here, so I'd like to compete for best background.
My name is Jason Tugger. I started the collective Boys Be Good in, I guess, late winter of 2011, so like January, February, after the Hide and Seek show censored Wojnarowicz, or the Smithsonian censored the Wojnarowicz video. Currently, Boys Be Good consists of 14 gay male artists. We produce shows that are sort of based in themes that start as a queer biography, but then expand to be more universal than that. Our first show was based on the idea of transformation and sacrifice. So you have to give something up to get, or give something up to get something, essentially. The second was a modern critique of ideas of beauty, obsession, vanity, and narcissism. And our last show that we just had at the end of last summer was based in growth and decay. Um, so yeah, we've got 9 visual artists and 5 performance artists.
Wow.
So I'm Adrian Parsons. I'm a performance artist and musician, and I used to be involved at 443 I Street, where Luke was also hosting DIY events. 443 I is a old automotive parts warehouse in Chinatown in downtown DC, and the space became a DIY venue after its space as a practice space, art studio, music studio, video studio, homegrown fashion label, Dirkle was there. So it's a multi-space venue that eventually ended up closing in 2011, and that's my DIY background in a nutshell.
My name is Luke Stewart, and I guess I've been involved in the DIY community here in DC from going to shows while I was at college at AU, and then once I joined the band Laughing Man, our first rehearsal space was actually in 52 O Street, and then Mike from Laughing Man opened up a space on 14th Street in Crittenden, and we called it the DC Mini, and we had different shows and rehearsals and things going on in there. There's also like a store to King's Court in I guess it's southeast Capitol Hill. And then after that, we moved to Gold Leaf, I Street, Red Door, Hosiery, 443 I Street. That experience was really sort of like a really formative experience for each of us individually. So since then, Brandon went on to go live at Paper House, and they're doing their thing over there. Mike has been influential or a part of the the sort of DIY community on H Street. And also Mike, before we moved to Kings Court, Mike was actually the very first person to live at Paper Sun. So we also did rehearsals and stuff in there back when it's what used to be the warehouse Loft.
Oh, awesome. So 411 New York Avenue-ish.
Right. Same building, literally same space.
Hey, hi everybody. I'm sort of very new and very old to all this. I wouldn't have made the connection, but I grew up in the area in Prince George's County and actually listened to a lot of and went to some go-go shows in the early 90s. So I wouldn't have tied what we're doing now back to that, but it's a great tradition I couldn't begin to live up to. But it was a lot of fun to see that panel last night and to think about the connections between then and now. So I won't comment too much on that, but there's a lot to think about there. I was until very recently, until the end of September, director of marketing at NPR. I worked with NPR and PBS, and it's sort of a loose connection, but I guess I left largely because that work in public media felt very meaningful, but on a national and in some cases international sort of stage. And in some ways, I think what we're all doing now gets back to kind of the truest mission of public media, in a sense that it's content really tangibly by the community, of the community, for the community.
Do you want to take that one, Adrian? Go for it.
So there is definitely a need. The fact that a lot of these spaces that we're talking about had this aspect of live-work amalgam was pretty much not out of the fact that we wanted to be hosting shows in our living room, but the fact that there was no space. So Micah finds a living room, or we find a row house that happens to have the first 2 floors of a funeral home that have great acoustics, and you're just there. So what better place to do it than where you are? And of course, a practice space gives you the accessibility to the equipment that you're going to use to throw a show anyway. You know, it's like at Dead Kennedy Center was a similar setup to where 443 was at, where we had the ability to throw shows because we were there and we were practicing. So really easy load in, like the laziest thing possible. And it just got to the point where you want to open it up. You know, people like Alex Teveloff have understood this and done this really well, that if you want people to host you in other cities, you can host them right there at your space. And if you don't have necessarily the Velvet Lounge contact, then maybe they just play in your living room. So I've got a listings project that I subscribe to from New York, and it sends me every week artist spaces that are ready to rent. And here, I'll share, screen share. But like, you just scroll down, it's like art studios for rent. Williamsburg, Greenfoot, Gowanus, Hoboken. And they're completely, yeah, this comes out every week. And if you're looking for something like that in DC, that just doesn't exist, or I haven't seen it in the last 8 years that I've been here. So it's a wild, wild thing that when you get to DC and you want to make stuff, like, you just have to do that. You don't have the choice.
Yeah, and you know, just to continue on that, you know, for me, it was like at the point in my life where I was, I guess, 5 years ago now, when or 6 years ago now, when obviously, you know, in this city, it's almost like you need a space, and so yeah, it sort of came out of necessity, and then from that, sort of like tapping into, you know, going to shows, and you know, I'm sure all of us have been going to, you know, non-venue shows, you know, since we were in high school. So that aspect definitely isn't like a new concept or a revolutionary concept per se, but you know, just from my personal preferences, I would much rather see, you know, a show at Paper House rather than at, you know, the Fillmore or something like that. And likewise, you know, I would much rather work, make music, make art, what have you, in a dusty warehouse where I'm paying, you know, where I'm splitting rent with other members of my, you know, of my cohort, rather than paying, you know, $40 an hour or what have you to practice in a nice, clean, pristine studio where there's all these pressures, the, you know, time pressures and like rules. So it's almost like, you know, in terms of, you know, the quote DIY experience, there's really nothing else out there for me in terms of being a practicing artist.
Definitely. Well, Voice Be Good started in 2011 when Christopher and I got together after the censoring of that piece, the video piece "Fire in My Belly" by David Wojnarowicz. And we started sort of talking about the state of young gay art, essentially, and the fact that I don't think I've seen any in any local galleries, let alone museum shows. And so we actually started looking for gay artists in DC and trying to find them. And being that both Christopher works at the WPA, I work at Morton Fine Art on 18th and U, the space was already there, and it actually, as soon as I brought up the idea, my boss offered the space for us to have a show there almost immediately for like a weekend. We ended up having our first 2 shows at Morton Fine Art, so I guess it's not quite a do-it-yourself space, but in the essence that we sort of put the entire show together. It wasn't put together by a gallery. That's definitely in the same vein. But we've been pretty lucky in terms of spaces that we found. We found a gallery on 14th Street that was willing to host our last show for almost a month and a half. And this next show will probably be up for at least a month and a half, if not 2 months. So I guess we're not the conventional DIY sort of structure, but we found our way throughout the galleries, and I think it's mainly because both of us have been working in the DC art scene. I've been in the DC art scene for about 3.5 years now, working in galleries. Been here for about 4 years in total. So I guess that's really where we started.
What is the space like today? Are they complementing each other and, communicating with each other and supporting each other, or are there different spheres? And if so, what are the different spheres that we really see happening?
How about now?
Yes,
Yep.
perfect.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
We're starting to make up sign language, sorry.
Yeah, I was struck by that last night, and something that I've thought a lot about, which is diversity or segregation in the city, kind of writ large, and then in the arts in general, to use the term really broadly, and in the DIY scenes, plural. I think it's wrong even to use the singular, talking about the DIY scene. And I can't pretend to comment on the DIY kind of scenes across the city, and that's the point, because I think there is so much separation and segregation still. And that was clear in the kind of wished-for connection, and I think the wished-for overlap in last night's conversation, where my sense was that the moderator kind of asked, what was the overlap between the punk scene and the go-go scene? And it seemed like, I know she did, but a lot of people there maybe expected more of a connection between the two, and it seemed like there really wasn't one. And I'd sort of say the same now. I actually had pushback from the Washington Post recently when we were hosting a pop-up schoolroom for the month of January, again in the living room, which was an incredible experience and life-changing for me and eye-opening. And diversity was a real objective of it. And diversity is a lot of forms, like diversity of interest, diversity of talents, diversity by geography and by expertise and so forth. But then, of course, what we normally think of by age, by color, by income, by sexual orientation, et cetera. A freelancer pitched this story to the Washington Post and said, hey, there's this awesome schoolroom project going on. And the style editor said, oh, whatever, it sounds like a bunch of hipsters entertaining themselves. And to look at, some of the programming that a lot of us do, I think, and certainly that I, and people I surround myself with, I was really offended by that, but especially on that project, but, there's some truth to it. So I think it really is something to pay attention to. Are we operating in an echo chamber where we invite our friends into a cool garage space, or into a loft space, in my case, in Adams Morgan, or whatever, or are we really trying to reflect and reach out to, and then really revolutionize, I think, the creative culture of the city? And I like to think in terms of broader goals. I'm not sure that I'm satisfying them yet.
I think we started in the same way, where it was just sort of our being that I'd say at least half of the boys in Boys Be Good are Corcoran students. We basically just had the Corcoran scene around us entirely for our first show, maybe our first 2 shows. But it wasn't until we got sort of publicity, we got a Metro Weekly article, that things started picking up outside of that. But yeah, we definitely started in the same vein, where it was like, okay, I'm just getting all of my friends drunk, and this is the scene that we're in. But yeah, I'd say that really only existed for the first show or so, really, until we started getting a little bit more press.
In college, I would go to, they were in northern Mississippi. There are juke joints. That's DIY, where blues is being played, where some like really hardcore blues. I'm talking. You go into a spot that's like one of those prefabricated like aluminum shacks, and you go in, you show your ID or whatever, and you get a Dixie cup, or you show your ID, you pay $5, you get yourself a Dixie cup. You go to the quote bar, and somebody is there with a bottle of whiskey, and like that's the bar. You just go up there and get yourself, some whiskey in a Dixie cup and watch some blues, and then that community is all black. Same thing here in DC. What I've often come across is, of course, DC still even today with the changing demographics, still one of the highest per capita black populations in America in terms of cities. At a lot of spaces where things are going on, it's still whites only, depending upon what segment of the population you're talking about, depending upon what I guess musical even aesthetic you're talking about, for instance. And I really wanted to draw this parallel. You have Hole in the Sky, which is occupied, I believe, by all white people except for Wilmer.
Eric.
Right. But before that, I believe the people who actually like first lived in there, it was a whites only space. And they were hosting, punk rock shows, which oddly enough in DC is very, very much tied to a black tradition in the form of Bad Brains. Right down the street, they were hosting punk shows and all kinds of stuff in the earlier beginnings. There was talk of a go-go spot being brought up, and all the story is of course well documented. But the go-go spot before their first show was shut down, whereas Hole in the Sky, where they had been hosting loud punk shows for at least a few months, were shut down, after the go-go spot got shut down, before the go-go spot even had their first show. So it's in terms of segregation. Back to your original question, like in terms of segregation, it's that the DIY community is as segregated as America continues to be in terms of its aesthetic, its opportunities, its outlets. It all comes together into where we are today. Now, in terms of what I do, what Gio and I do with Capital Bop, obviously, jazz being a very important part of the black tradition in America, by default we get black folks coming out to shows because they, in DC we're lucky enough to have a strong support network of black people who go out and support jazz. When people say DIY, do it yourself or whatever, talking about alternative spaces, this is something that has been going on for a long time, and its segregation will continue as long as it's really just a reflection of society from what I see. I think that Gold Leaf was a very, very good example of how you can have several communities like living and working within the same building. I think in terms of, what it naturally occurring, I might agree with that the segregation is natural because, with whatever you're trying to do, you're going to be working within a certain framework, and that certain framework is going to reach.
I can't say that I've noticed that with our kind of shows. I mean, being that we have race isn't really played into the way that we've curated shows or the way that we curate artists. It just isn't. It's more about the work and personality of the artist as opposed to race has never had anything to do with it. And in terms of our sort of the people that come to our shows, I haven't sort of noticed that or taken note of that either, because it just maybe it's different in a music venue, but in terms of the art venue, the gallery that I work for is mainly, I'd say it's mainly African American artists, and so we already have that sort of like that collector basis that actually a lot of them came to the Boys Be Good show, but that's not the reason that we started, and that's not really what I'm taking note of at the show, and maybe it's different within the different venues, but.
So Gold Leaf, Hosiery, 443 I Street, Red Door, all in one breath. But the space, Lucas is right. I think just in terms of diversity, the biggest entrants on that were like not just DC Jazz Loft, but downstairs, Dirkle would come through, and even though they were there for just 2.5, 3 years, and they were there representing a retail outfit, Dirkle Streetwear Clothing Company, Will Sharp brought in Judah on the Beat, brought in Wale, brought in Philaday, and they would host concerts downstairs, open up their garage door, and like those would just be massive. And in terms of a mixing of crowds, like actual collaborations happened. So like this is a mixtape that Judah ended up putting out, and it was like our band, Three White Guys on Synthesizers, was the second track on this Dirkle Judah collaboration. Judah's a producer for Wale, so like there was this kind of just nearest neighbor collaboration that was happening that otherwise like I would have never met Judah, let alone like gotten on a tape of his. So it was really hilarious that like that could happen, that there would be a country band, Honey House, upstairs, and you'd be waiting for a guy to be finished recording a track because the walls were that thin, and then like all of a sudden you hear a 4 to the floor beat. Like that's all happening under one roof. I don't know what the testament of that is. It's probably just that these spaces were too tiny and there weren't enough of them, so everyone just kind of ended up at the same spot. If you wanted to throw a show and you knew Will or you knew Lucas or you knew Brendan or the kids from US Royalty, then you could talk to them. But yeah, if Dirkle weren't there and there wasn't that access, then it just wouldn't happen. So a lot of it's serendipitous, but being just in Chinatown like helped a little bit because all the buses stop at Gallery Place. So coming from the east or coming from the west, meet right in the middle in Chinatown, and there was some luck to that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I don't know about spiritual experience. It's a very special and very different kind of experience, as I think of it, which is part of why I keep going, even though sometimes, it's like a war zone in my living room, and it's like it's kind of crazy. And I'm sure, Adrian, the condition you guys lived in, I think showering under a hose outside, like whatever conditions you lived in, just to make to keep your creative work up, to keep the community going, to keep the studio spaces and the performance spaces and so forth alive. There is sacrifice in it. I think that's part of why I guess like there might be sacrifice in spiritual life, right? And I get thanked all the time, which is sort of awkward. I'm standing in my kitchen, I'm kind of having a beer, and I'm just watching the concert like anybody else, or attending a food swap, which is a really cool thing that happens there, comedy show or whatever. And I don't know that the bartender or the owner of DC9 get thanked a lot. Like, thank you so much for doing this. And it's like people do feel a part of a space and a part of a community and an experience that I think can be much more personal. It is for me as a host, and it seems to be very personal for people who are performing or attending too.
Mm.
And what kind of risks are you taking in order to provide a space that this community so wants and needs access to?
Most importantly, in a space like 411, which ultimately I think kind of helped lead to the downfall of Gold Leaf, was that it's very, very, very important to have like the right combination of serious people involved in who are deeply involved in the operation, because otherwise, like what happened towards the end of Gold Leaf, like Gold Leaf, was always a beautiful thing, but towards the end, as word came out that it automatically like ceased to become a work spot and became a party spot only.
An end note, at least in terms of my experience, is that I've been either kicked out of or quietly evicted from every art space that I've been involved in, and that's because we've we like always had the idea that like aggressive programming and like if it's DIY, it's going to be like DIY or die, right? Just keep going. So 52 O Street, like basically voluntarily left. Our lease was brought back from 1 year to 7 months, and that worked. At 1337 on H Street, we were throwing aggressive programming for about a month and a half. We were in the space. Eric Hilton was like nice enough for us to just exist there. As we were producing content, like the neighbors noticed that we were getting crowds there, and the neighbors were bars, and they outed us as not having a license and hosting shows there because they realized that people weren't coming to their bars because of it.
After one of the more memorable events that I hosted that was just a huge party, kind of a full-on party, in ways that I won't even talk about on the record. I actually got a call from a friend who's a lawyer who wasn't even there. He heard about the party from a mutual friend and called me and said, "Be careful." And in so many ways, and that included simple things that I can talk about, which are just people hanging out on my fire escape, and you know, what if somebody has had a little bit to drink, or they're just a little too excited, and you know, and they fall off. And I don't, candidly, I don't have any kind of insurance beyond standard renter's insurance, and there's residential zoning. It's simply that I, on paper, just love to host people in my apartment. So on paper, that's just like anybody else hosting a dinner party, except that I might have 150 people and a few bands there.
Have you drawn like a limit in your mind of, you know, where you're gonna kind of draw the line with that, or is it just you see where it goes?
Yeah, I think part of it for sure has been what Luke talked about, and actually Luke has both been to and performed in the space now, and I think, you know, who I collaborate with and who I learn from, really being relatively new to this. That's incredibly important. So I've been fairly deliberate about that, and I'm more and more deliberate about that. Discovering more and more that I can't sort of physically, logistically do all of this myself, and also that I just don't know how to, and that there's a lot of tradition in the DIY scene, as you say, if you want to talk about it that way, and a lot of people who do know what they're doing, who have learned the hard way. And I guess us, broadly speaking, I think including everybody on this panel and a few others, and talking about the potential for, I think, an unwired informal connection across these spaces, right, where we can kind of have a larger impact, kind of banding together, even if that's an informal connection.
Essentially, this doesn't happen by itself, so you know you have to really push it, and you have to make sure that if one art space is closing down, that you've got the next spot. You've got 411, or you go from 14th Main to 29, and from 29 to 443, and from 443 to 1337 H Street. And it's like, just if you run out of names, just do numbers. It's like much easier.
Yeah.
Yes, take risks, because otherwise you're not doing it yourself. You're just doing it within the bounds of a venue or a gallery or a music space.
As a resident of DC, and as an active participant in, I guess, the creative culture here in the city, and it's, for me, I think that it's one of the best places that I've been to, at least, especially, like, you know, just considering how it changes, like, all the time. You know, there's not like a institution here that is that started off like DIY that I know of. I might have my histories wrong, but you know, in places like New York, like, DIY is all but institutionalized at this point. I mean, there are still your warehouse spaces, and as Adrian was sharing, there's these listservs with all these different art spaces. Some of them are very expensive, But in DC, I guess because of the nature of the city, with the spaces, being so um, short-lived, oftentimes it's almost like a blessing and a curse. Cherish it because it's probably not going to be there for a very long time. But also that it's almost like there's always something new happening. There's always like a new scene happening. The amazing artists that do live here, present company included. So, I think overall, pound for pound, for me, DC's where it's at.